When you build something physical, like a brick wall or maybe a wooden deck, there's this undeniable visual proof of your effort at the end of the day. You start your morning with a pallet of materials on the grass.
Right, just a pile of stuff.
Yeah, and you do the physical labor, and by sunset, you have an actual structure. Like, it occupies physical space. You can touch it, you can point to it, and you can say, I built that today.
Because the progress is entirely tangible. There's this direct, basically one-to-one relationship between the energy you expended and the reality you altered.
But look at modern life. Look at knowledge work or running a business or even just trying to manage your own personal development. The palette of bricks is completely invisible.
Utterly invisible.
You sit at a desk, you lift these heavy cognitive loads all day long, and you are completely drained by 5 o'clock. And there is no wall. You look around and everything looks exactly the same as it did at 9 in the morning.
Which is, that's the absolute definition of the modern productivity trap. We are measuring exhaustion instead of construction.
Wow, yeah. Exhaustion instead of construction.
We just assume that because we're tired, we must build something. But those two things are entirely decoupled in the modern work environment.
And that invisible discrepancy, that's our mission for today's deep dive. We're looking at a pretty fascinating stack of sources today. It's anchored by this highly critical video essay and some surrounding research on the actual architecture of personal productivity.
Yeah, it's essentially a complete teardown of why the systems you're probably using right now are structurally broken.
Right. And the central argument we're unpacking is that the task-based model we all default to is actually the root cause of modern burnout, and that shifting to a project mindset is the only sustainable fix.
It's a fundamentally disruptive claim, honestly, because it attacks the bedrock of how we're taught to operate. We're trained from elementary school to make lists of tasks.
Just make lists and cross things out.
Exactly.
Now, if you are listening to this, you've likely heard 1,000 different productivity hacks before.
Oh, definitely.
You've tried the Pomodoro technique. You've, attempted Inbox Zero. You've read those articles insisting you need to wake up at 5 a.m., drink lemon water, and gaze directly into the sun.
The standard internet advice.
Right.
Yep.
So you have every right to be highly doubtful that this deep dive is going to be any different from all that noise.
And honestly, the skepticism is totally warranted. The productivity industry is largely this snake oil market built on selling you slightly different variations of the exact same broken wheel.
Yeah.
It focuses on optimizing the speed of the wheel rather than asking, if the wheel is actually attached to a vehicle.
Let's take the perspective of someone who feels just entirely overwhelmed by the current landscape of software and systems, because most of us carry around this massive cognitive weight just trying to maintain our own systems.
The maintenance alone is exhausting.
It is. We have Notion databases. We spend a whole weekend color coding. We have complex time blocking routines on our calendars. We have 3 different to-do apps.
And adopting these tools rarely actually liberates us.
No, it just creates a secondary, unpaid part-time job. We basically become middle managers of our own lives, endlessly shuffling digital paper around without delivering actual, meaningful progress on the things that actually matter.
Right. The administrative overhead of managing the workflow becomes heavier than the execution of the work itself. You're spending more energy organizing the demands than fulfilling them.
So we're not going to pitch you a new app today. We're not offering a morning routine. What these sources offer is a fundamental reframe of the unit of work itself.
But to understand why the unit of work needs reframing, we really have to start with a diagnosis of where you're currently sitting. The core video essay we're analyzing poses a question directly to the viewer, and I want to pose it directly to you listening right now.
Okay, lay it out.
Think about the last time you had a genuinely productive day.
A genuinely productive day.
Right? Not a busy day. Not a day where you felt like you were just doing a lot of frantic, high-speed maneuvering. A day where you sat down at the end of it, closed your laptop, and thought, I actually moved something forward today. Real progress on something that matters.
Let's actually sit with that for a second. How long ago was that day?
Yeah, just think about it.
When people are forced to confront this question, there is almost always a noticeable hesitation.
Oh, absolutely. If you're pausing right now, mentally scanning back through your calendar, trying to find a day that fits that specific description, you're confronting the reality of the structural flaw we're talking about.
And that hesitation is heavy, because usually when we struggle to answer that question quickly, our immediate instinct is to internalize the blame.
We assume it's a moral failing.
Exactly. We think, I'm just disorganized, I'm lazy, I'm bad at managing my time, I lack discipline. But the literature we're looking at today makes something incredibly clear, and we need to validate this right now. You are not lazy.
You're not disorganized. The contradiction is actually what makes this so fascinating, because the people who struggle most with this feeling of stagnation are very often the ones working the hardest.
Right.
They're highly intelligent, highly capable people. They have the systems, they have the discipline, they're putting in 10-hour days. They're operating with incredibly high levels of activity, but yielding shockingly low levels of actual progress.
High activity, low progress. Let's look at how this plays out in reality. The source talks about this Monday-Tuesday cycle.
Oh, this is so common.
You sit down on Monday morning, you open your task manager, and you write down every single thing you need to handle. Approve the new vendor contract. Reply to the escalation from the engineering team. Review the Q3 marketing spend.
Book the flight for the quarterly offsite. Follow up with legal.
Right. It's a perfectly rational, responsible-looking inventory of work. So you execute. You put your head down, you drink your coffee, you ruthlessly work through the day, and you get through most of it.
Checking the boxes.
You check those boxes, you feel that momentary hit of dopamine with every little check mark. But then Tuesday morning arrives. You sit down at your exact same desk, you open the exact same notebook, and the list is just as long.
Or longer.
Yes. Sometimes, because of the emails that came in overnight while you were sleeping, the list is actually longer than it was on Monday morning.
Which creates this very specific, corrosive kind of psychological wear and tear. Over time, that cycle doesn't just make you tired. It makes you cynical about your own capacity to achieve anything meaningful.
It's entirely demoralizing. You start to ask yourself why it feels like you're sprinting on a treadmill just to avoid getting thrown off the back.
Just trying to keep up.
You get this creeping, suffocating realization that you are only ever managing the surface of your life. You're skimming the top layer of existence, keeping the plate spinning, putting out the immediate fires, but you're never actually building the architecture of your career or your life.
So if the problem isn't the worker, and it isn't the amount of effort being applied, because, again, you are clearly working hard, then the source material argues we have to look at the tool.
The tool itself.
Right. The flaw exists within the fundamental architecture of how you define your work. This is a structural problem. The very concept of the task is fundamentally broken for modern knowledge work.
I mean, I look at my own task list and I realize almost everything on there is just me reacting to someone else's emergency or someone else's timeline. Is that the core failure? That we are basically just playing defense?
That is exactly the failure. Task-based thinking only manages what is already in motion. It does not create forward motion. Look at the Monday list we just discussed. Reply to the engineering escalation. Review the marketing spend. Book the flight. Follow up with legal. Every single one of those items exists almost entirely because someone else created the initial momentum.
They're the visible layer of work. An email landed in your inbox because someone else hit send. A meeting was requested because someone else needed your input. A compliance document exists because a regulatory body demands it.
You're operating entirely in a reactive stance. You are simply a processor of incoming demands.
It's like you're essentially standing at the very end of a high-speed conveyor belt in this massive, windowless factory. Things are just flying down the belt at you.
Just endless boxes.
Emails, Slack pings, meeting requests, errands, operational fires. And your only job is to catch them before they fall off the edge and smash on the floor.
Right?
And because you're a capable person, you get really good at catching them. You become the world's most efficient conveyor belt catcher. But you are entirely trapped by the speed and the volume of what the belt dictates.
And more importantly, standing at the end of the belt catching things means you are never, ever going to be the person who actually builds the factory. You're just playing an infinite, unwinnable game of defense.
That is such a bleak but accurate picture. The conveyor belt only delivers the urgent and the requested. It delivers the visible work.
But think about the things that actually matter. Your long-term career trajectory, overhauling a broken team culture, building a new, highly complex skill, writing a book.
Those things do not come down the conveyor belt. No one is emailing you urgently at 4:00 p.m. on a Thursday demanding that you fulfill your long-term creative potential.
Or fix the underlying structural issues in your department.
Exactly.
The deeply important things either don't show up on your task lists at all, or they show up in a way that is fundamentally useless and cognitively damaging.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they show up as a single vague item buried among the reactive tasks. An item like fix Q3 churn rate or redesign the marketing funnel. or overhaul onboarding.
Oh, man. We all know the exact psychological impact of seeing that on a list.
It's terrible.
You have a list that says, approve vendor invoice, Slack Dave about the meeting, review legal doc, and then redesign the marketing funnel.
Right next to slacking Dave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You look at that list on Monday, you approve the invoice, you Slack Dave, you review the doc. Then your eyes hit, redesign the marketing funnel. And you just feel this vague, heavy sense of guilt.
Your brain registers massive cognitive friction.
Yeah. You think, I need a solid 3 hours of deep focus for that. I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow comes. You do the easy tasks. You stare at the big one. More guilt. This item can sit on your list for 3 weeks, completely untouched, just radiating anxiety every time you open your notebook.
We need to analyze the cognitive mechanics of why it sits there. Because it's not because you don't care about the marketing funnel. It's not because you're procrastinating out of laziness. It sits there because, as the literature points out, redesign the marketing funnel is not a task.
Right.
It is the name of an abstraction. It's the name of an outcome.
It's the name of an outcome, not an action.
And the brain processes abstractions entirely differently than physical actions. A task list is a tool designed to hold clear, immediate physical steps. When you take a complex, multi-step abstraction and force it onto a list meant for simple actions, your brain basically experiences cognitive overload.
It literally does not know what physical movement to make next.
Exactly. So it opts for paralysis. It just freezes.
It's a mismatch between the tool and the input. Your brain reads approve invoice and knows exactly what the physical action is. Open the PDF, check the number, click the green button.
Boom, done.
But it reads redesign marketing funnel and hits a wall of ambiguity. What is the first step? Do I need to pull the analytics? Do I need to schedule a meeting with the creative team?
Do I need to read up on competitor funnels?
Right. The brain hates ambiguity, so it chooses the path of least resistance. It skips over it and goes back to slacking Dave.
In cognitive psychology, this actually relates to the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah, it's the tendency to remember interrupted or incomplete tasks better than completed ones. But when the quote-unquote task is actually a massive undefined abstraction, it just becomes a constant background hum of unresolved stress.
Oh, wow. So task lists process the incoming reactive demands perfectly, but they completely ignore the outgoing, the proactive things you actually want to put out into the world.
Exactly. The inevitable diagnosis here is that your day is entirely eaten by the reactive surface, leaving your true goals frozen in a state of perpetual vague guilt. Your to-do list is actually just an inventory of your anxiety.
An inventory of your anxiety.
Every item on there that isn't a single physical action is literally a micro failure waiting to happen.
That hits incredibly close to home. So if the unit of the task is a structural failure for anything that requires deep sequential progress, what's the alternative? How do we stop catching things off the conveyor belt and actually start building the factory?
The sources propose a complete reframe of how we categorize our work. The argument is that the correct unit of work, the only one that actually creates forward motion on complex issues, is a project.
Okay, see, the word project immediately triggers my defense mechanisms.
I get that.
And I guarantee anyone listening who works in a corporate environment is feeling the exact same visceral reaction. When I hear project, I hear Jira boards.
Right, Gantt charts.
Endless bureaucratic Gantt charts. I picture middle managers scheduling pre-meetings to discuss the agenda for the alignment meeting about the deliverables. That just sounds like adding more administrative overhead, not reducing it.
We have to completely strip away all that corporate bureaucratic baggage. The definition of a project provided in this framework is radically simple, almost aggressively so.
Okay, what is it?
A project is any outcome that requires more than one action to complete.
Any outcome that requires more than one action.
That's it. If it takes more than one discrete step to achieve the desired state, it is not a task. It is a project.
I'm going to push back on this heavily because applying this to actual daily life seems like a recipe for absolute madness. Let's go back to our overwhelmed beginner. They're already drowning in a list of 50 tasks. Now, this framework tells them, actually, 40 of those aren't tasks, they're projects. Doesn't upgrading every multi-step thing in my life to the status of a project create a catastrophic amount of mental friction?
It will.
Like if I need to get the oil changed in my car, that requires calling the mechanic, driving to the shop, waiting, and paying. That's 4 steps. Am I really supposed to treat getting my oil changed as a project with the same weight as overhauling my department's onboarding process? Where is the line?
Okay, but the friction you're feeling isn't coming from the framework, it's coming from reality. Getting your oil changed is a project.
It is.
Yes, the reason you procrastinate on it, the reason the check engine light stays on for 3 weeks,
Yeah.
is precisely because your brain knows it requires 4 steps, but you've written it down as 1. You're lying to your brain about the complexity of the work, and your brain is calling your bluff by refusing to do it.
But defining the current state, the outcome, and the next physical action for every minor errand seems like I'm spending more time planning than doing.
You only need to formalize the planning for the things where the friction of execution outweighs the friction of planning.
Okay, explain that.
The source material uses the example of a business plan to illustrate this trade-off. When it sits on your to-do list as work on the business plan, it induces guilt and remains unactionable because it's a black box of anxiety.
Right.
Treating it as a project forces you to define 4 specific parameters. What is the ultimate goal? What is the current state? What is the specific sequence of steps? And what is the very next physical action?
So you're saying the administrative overhead I'm worried about.
The 5 minutes it takes to answer those questions, yes, is actually just the process of achieving clarity. And clarity is the only thing that creates motion.
I can see the utility for a business plan or a massive corporate initiative. The friction of planning is worth it because the cost of failure is high. But let's look at personal development. The literature brings up the example of going to the gym, and this is where I think the friction argument gets really interesting.
It's a great example.
If I want to get fit, writing go to the gym on my list seems perfectly logical. It is an action. My body physically goes to a location. Why does that need to be elevated to a project?
We have to look at the historical data of how that actually plays out in human behavior. The task way of getting fit operates on pure, raw discipline, which is a finite resource.
Right.
You write, go to the gym on a sticky note. You rely on motivation. You do it on Tuesday.
Right.
You do it on Thursday. Then next week, reality hits.
You have a deadline at work, you sleep poorly, your kid gets sick.
Exactly. The task falls off the list because it was never integrated into your infrastructure.
Yeah.
3 months go by. You feel guilty, so you write, go to the gym again. You rely on another burst of motivation. It falls off again.
That is a brutally accurate timeline of almost every fitness resolution ever made.
And it happens because go to the gym, written in isolation on a Tuesday, has no context. It is not an action plan. It's just a wish written in imperative grammar. It isn't anchored to your reality.
So how does the project way fix that?
Well, look at the project way. You acknowledge that integrating a new physically demanding behavior into your life requires more than one step. So you define the outcome.
The outcome being going to the gym.
No, the outcome is not the action of going to the gym. The outcome is the state of being. Like, I am consistently training 3 times a week by the end of the month without it disrupting my core work hours.
Ah, okay. You're defining a new baseline reality, not just a one-off event.
Yes. Once you have the outcome, you define the current state. I have no routine, I don't belong to a gym, I don't know what exercises to do, and my mornings are chaotic.
Sounds familiar.
The gap between the current state and the outcome dictates the sequence of actions. Step 1, research gyms within a 10-minute radius of the office. Step 2, pick one and complete the online sign-up. Step 3, block 3 specific 1-hour slots in my calendar for next week and set them to busy. Step 4, pack the gym bag the night before. Step 5, physically show up to the first slot.
Wow. When you break it down like that, the task go to the gym is actually just step 5, hiding behind the assumption that steps 1 through 4 will magically handle themselves.
And of course they don't.
They don't. The project approach forces you to build the infrastructure before you demand the execution.
It perfectly illustrates the map analogy that runs through this research. Managing your life with a standard task list is like trying to navigate a complex, highly congested city using nothing but a disorganized list of street names.
Just a scrap of paper that says Main Street, Washington Avenue, 4th Street, Elm.
Right. The information on the paper is technically accurate. Those streets exist, and you do need to travel on them. But without a map, the list is functionally useless.
You have no idea where you are.
Exactly. It doesn't tell you where your current location is, it doesn't tell you where the final destination is, and it certainly doesn't tell you the necessary sequence to traverse those streets to get there. You're just wandering around hoping you eventually stumble onto Washington Avenue.
So a project-based approach is the map. It establishes the current coordinates, sets the destination pin, and draws the route.
And once you internalize this distinction, you begin to see the universal application. Every single thing of actual value in your life operates on a project architecture.
Advancing your career.
It's a project.
Maintaining your physical health.
A project. Planning a meaningful holiday, repairing a strained relationship, buying a house, learning a language, none of these things can be completed in a single sitting. Right. They require sustained, sequential, coordinated effort over time. If you try to shove them into a task management tool, the tool will physically break under the weight of that complexity, or your brain will simply abandon the goals altogether to protect itself from the cognitive dissonance.
The theory is airtight. I mean, the diagnosis of the task trap explains exactly why we feel so exhausted yet stagnant. And the project reframe makes complete logical sense. But there is a massive chasm between understanding something intellectually and actually implementing it when you open your laptop on a Monday morning. The source material ends with a very specific practical exercise to bridge this gap, to actually rewire how you look at your demands.
So we're going to transition from theory to action right now.
We're going to do this live.
Let's do the conversational role play. We need to demonstrate what this cognitive shift actually sounds like in practice.
Okay, I am going to be the overwhelmed knowledge worker. I'm opening up my actual messy, real-world notes app right now.
All right, let's hear it.
It is a disaster zone of half-baked thoughts, immediate crises, and capital letter demands to myself. What is the single required habit the framework prescribes?
The habit is relentless categorization. You look at every single item on your list and you force your brain to answer one binary question. Is this a single physical action or is this project?
Okay. Item number 1 on my list right now. Approve the Q3 software licensing invoice.
Apply the rule. Does it require more than one physical step to achieve the outcome?
No. I log into the procurement portal, I review the attached PDF, I click the approve button. It takes 2 minutes. It is a single, uninterrupted flow of action.
Then it is a true task. It stays on the list. You can execute it immediately. Move to the next one.
Okay, item number 2. This is a big one that's been sitting here for weeks. Overhaul the team's onboarding process.
Ask the question, is this a single action?
Obviously not. I can't just sit down and do an overhaul. I have to interview the last 3 hires to find out what was broken about their onboarding. I need to review the current documentation. I need to draft a new 30, 60, 90-day plan template.
Keep going.
I need to get buy-in from the department head. I need to coordinate with IT for the hardware provisioning. It's a massive web of dependencies. It is absolutely a project.
Excellent. Now that you've correctly identified it as a project, the framework requires you to stop treating it like a task immediately.
So what do I do with it?
You must answer 2 mandatory questions to translate the abstraction into reality. Question 1. What is the specific outcome you are building toward? What does done look like?
Done looks like.
Yeah.
We have a standardized, documented onboarding wiki that completely automates the first week for a new hire, and the department head has signed off on it.
Clear. Measurable. As a defined end state.
Yeah.
Question 2, and this is where the magic happens. What is the very next physical action you need to take to move it forward?
Next physical action.
Notice the emphasis on physical action, not think about or strategize. What does your body actually need to do?
Right. I can't strategize the onboarding. The very next physical action is I need to open Slack, message Sarah, who is our most recent hire, and ask if she has 15 minutes on Thursday to tell me what she hated about her first week.
Look at the cognitive shift that just occurred.
Yeah.
You know, you took a heavy, vague, guilt-inducing abstraction overhaul of the team's onboarding process, which was paralyzing you every time you looked at it.
And I replaced it with a single, highly actionable, completely frictionless physical next step. Slack Sarah for a 15-minute chat.
Exactly.
The psychological relief of that is massive. I don't have to overhaul the entire onboarding process today. I don't have to map out the 90-day plan today. I just have to type a message to Sarah. That takes 30 seconds.
It creates immediate forward motion.
Let's do one more, because this next one is a classic knowledge worker trap. The item just says, figure out why marketing metrics are down.
A perfect example of an impossible demand masquerading as a task or project.
It's a project. Or, an investigation.
Yeah.
I have to pull the Google Analytics data. I have to look at the ad spend. I have to talk to the social media manager. I have to analyze the current conversion rate on the landing page.
So what is the defined outcome?
The outcome is a 1-page brief diagnosing the root cause of the traffic drop with 3 proposed solutions ready for the Friday all-hands meeting.
And what is the very next physical action, not the data analysis phase, the very next physical movement?
The very next physical action is to log into the analytics dashboard, set the date range to the last 30 days, and export the traffic source report to a CSV file.
You see how liberating this architecture is?
Totally.
You don't have to figure out a massive departmental crisis today. Figuring it out is an outcome that happens after a sequence of events. Today, you just have to click Export on a dashboard.
Just click Export.
The framework promises that doing this single habit consistently, looking at your chaotic list, relentlessly separating the true single-step tasks from the multi-step projects, and then ruthlessly defining the very next physical action for those projects will do more for your actual output and your mental health than any time-blocking app in existence.
Because you are finally operating at the correct level of reality. You are no longer demanding the impossible of yourself.
Right. You're no longer asking your brain to execute abstractions.
You are mapping the sequence and then walking the map one physical step at a time.
You are systematically building the factory rather than just standing at the end of the conveyor belt waiting to get hit by the next box.
Let's pull all of this together because the paradigm shift here is profound if you actually apply it. We started by diagnosing the task trap. We explored how managing our lives purely through task lists traps us on the reactive surface of life.
We're incredibly efficient at responding to things already in motion.
The emails, the escalations, the visible work. But we completely lack the architecture to create our own momentum on the things that actually matter. We unpacked the heavy, demoralizing burden of the Monday-Tuesday cycle, where high activity serves only to mask a severe lack of deep progress.
And from that diagnosis, we moved into the empowerment of the project reframe. We redefined a project, stripping away the corporate bureaucracy to mean simply any outcome requiring more than one action.
And we analyze the cognitive science behind this, how forcing abstractions onto a task list triggers the Zeigarnik effect and cognitive overload.
And we saw how the project reframe provides the map to navigate our complex goals, rather than just handing us a disorganized list of street names and hoping for the best.
And finally, we proved it through application. By forcing ourselves to ask two uncompromising questions, what is the defined outcome and what is the exact next physical action, we demonstrated how to dismantle the vague anxiety of big goals and translate them into immediate, frictionless forward motion.
Turning overhaul onboarding into Slack, Sarah.
We turn an inventory of anxiety into a blueprint for action.
It is a structural, architectural fix for what we've mistakenly assumed was a moral or disciplinary failing.
Which leaves us with a genuinely provocative new angle to ponder, building on everything we've unpacked today. I want you to think deeply about this as you go back to your desk or your life. What if the things you've been procrastinating on for months?
The big career pivots, the difficult conversations, the creative endeavors.
Right, the systemic changes. What if they aren't actually that hard? What if you aren't lazy, you aren't incapable, and these things aren't beyond your threshold of discipline?
What if they are simply projects that your brain has mislabeled as tasks, causing an unresolvable structural error in your mind?
If your brain thinks write a book or change careers is the exact same category of action as buy milk, of course it shuts down. The system crashes.
The procrastination isn't a failure of your character, it's a failure of your categorization.
It's an architectural error. You're staring at an empty patch of grass, absolutely exhausted, and beating yourself up because the brick wall hasn't spontaneously built itself. You have to stop demanding the wall and just lay the first physical brick.
Lay the first brick.
We highly encourage you to open your to-do list right now with this new lens. Look at the items you've been avoiding. Find the hidden projects masquerading as tasks, extract the next physical action, and start building. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.